Well, good morning again. So good to see you all, and thank you for being here, especially if you're a visitor. Thanks for taking the chance to be in a group of strangers who it could be an uncomfortable situation, so I hope that it is not. When I first came here as a visitor, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, it felt like home to me. I felt like I was with like-hearted people, and we need that because community is medicinal, and we are going to need community more than ever. As we begin, if you could just quickly share with me a cause that you're passionate about. Women's rights. Justice. Climate change. Voting rights.
Halloween.
Hallelujah. Truth. Okay. Hold those things that you're passionate about. Hold those internal burdens that you have. They're going to be important as we talk for the next hour or so. So we are about 3 weeks away from an election. I didn't know that until Sue said that. It's kind of important, right? I wonder how you're feeling about it. For me, it's kind of like waiting for what could be Christmas and could be a horror movie, right? It's like a sandwich made of hope and dread. It's like planning for a day in the future and not knowing whether you're going to be attending a party or a funeral. So it's with this strange expectation and yet preemptive despair that we are proceeding with our lives right now. And it's easy to think that an election is about politics, which on the surface, of course, it is. But in a deeper and more profound way, it's about much more than that, isn't it? An election, and this election specifically, is about our values and our convictions. It's about people whose lives will be determined by the policies that will result from that election. It's about a planet and an environment that will be irrevocably altered by those who assume power. It's about the systems here that either inhibit or support the poor, the hungry, the sick, the vulnerable, the foreigner. It's about laws that make us collectively safer or more violent, that either expand America so that it is accessible to more people or to shrink its availability to fewer and fewer. An election is about the kind of nation we want those who follow us to inherit. The world that we want to leave as our legacy. Martin Luther King says the vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by human beings for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison people because they are different from others. Author and renowned meditation leader Sharon Salzberg says, voting is the expression of our commitment to one another, to this country, and to this world. And civil rights leader and Congressman John Lewis said, the vote is precious. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democratic society, and we must use it. Because of these things, an election, friends, is an opportunity for us to declare what matters to us, the deepest contents of our hearts, the things that twist us inside. The act of voting, it's an expression of patriotism, yes, but it's a sacred responsibility as citizens of this country and citizens of this planet, and it is also the act of voting a profoundly spiritual act. Now, we need to be clear. We are currently, in this moment, in a spiritual community, and I'm saying the word election. The separation of church and state is critical, even though it feels like it's eroding right now in the worst of ways. But I know that the separation of church and state is something that you probably agree with, and it's something that I believe in. However, and this is important, the separation of our personal morality from our personal politics is impossible, right? We all vote in a way that reflects the causes and ideas that are important to us, and we should. Because all politics does, or should do at its best, is reflect the shared values of those who vote. So, since this is an opportunity for our nation to collectively declare our will, the things that matter to us as a people, I'm a little bit worried. I'm worried about the election outcome for my children, but I'm worried about that outcome for other people's children. Even people who are voting in opposition to me, even people who believe antithetically to me, I'm worried about their children because I want all the justice and diversity and beauty and peace and health for them. I'm worried about women not having autonomy over their own bodies. I'm worried about people losing the right to marry the person they love. I'm worried about transgender teenagers and their families being persecuted, and I'm worried about people being gerrymandered into silence. I'm worried about more people being killed because so many seem to value guns more than human beings. And so when you think about this election, I wonder what you're worried about. When you imagine waking up in a world that looks a little less optimistic, where does your mind go? Because we're all likely worried about that Tuesday in November that Sue alerted us to, for all the reasons I just shared and many others. November 8th is a place that our minds and our hearts have been fixated on lately. It's the subject of conversations we have over coffee, right? It's dominating our social media feeds. It's all over the news. And if you're like me, it sneaks up on you in moments when you are experiencing otherwise normal times of joy and peace, when you suddenly realize there is a date coming that I'm worried about. So right now our energies are understandably directed and our hopes are pinned to this singular day ahead, as if at the end of it we're going to have some resolution, some sense of closure, as if rest and healing will finally come. But what if things don't go the way we'd like? What if the news is bad? I was in Charlotte last weekend talking to a group of people who I would say are like-hearted as well. And we were in a restaurant and we were talking about this, and a woman said to me, "John, but what happens if everything goes wrong on November 8th? What if we lose? What do we do then? Where will hope be?" You might be asking yourself that. What if we wake up on Wednesday, November 9th to the worst case scenario? And it's a valid question, and it's a question that's really impossible for us to answer. Because until that day comes, we can't imagine what it will feel like. But I'm going to try to answer the question of what happens if we wake up on November 9th and it's the worst case scenario in whatever way we imagine it. I think hope then will be wherever it is for you now. Because regardless of what happens on that Tuesday in November, whatever propels you into the voting booth needs to push you out onto your feet when the sun comes up on Wednesday. Because no matter what the outcome is and whether you feel vindicated or distraught, many things will still be the same. It's just some people will be celebrating and others will be grieving. Some will feel protected by the laws of this land, and some will feel more vulnerable because of them. But you're still going to be surrounded on that day by systemic ills, by relational fracture, by national discord. You're still going to have seen every ugly reality that you have had revealed to you over the past 6 years or so. And you'll still be sharing your days with tired, wounded human beings who are looking for compassionate people to see their suffering and to move toward it. You'll still have a specific front row seat to a place filled with beauty and with terror, and you'll be the only one with your unprecedented ability to be what that world that you encounter needs. And that's not going to change no matter what happens on November 8th into the 9th. In other words, your values and your convictions will matter just as much that day as they matter today. This isn't just about an election. It's easy to believe that it is, that with a pull of a lever of a transfer of power, that our security will be restored, that our demise might be guaranteed because of that, but that's simply not true either way. We've learned that over the past couple of years, that favorable election outcomes don't equal internal peace, do they? And they don't even equal national harmony. We'll still need to hold our leaders accountable. We'll still need to fight to be heard. We'll still have to not fall asleep when apparent progress shows up. And because of what may happen on that day, we may be required to work locally to care for the people who will be under more duress than ever. We may be challenged individually and collectively to offer people shelter and help and refuge and advocacy. And I'd like to think we here are moved and defined by more than just a date on the calendar, or an election result, or a candidate's victory. I'd like to believe that our collective elation or devastation do not reside in those things, that our collective moral and spiritual center tells us that there is more happening here. Because ultimately, this isn't about just another group of politicians either. If all the politicians you are thinking about removing are gone in an instant, you're still going to be left with the fallout of everything that they have revealed. Every ugliness, every cruel word uttered toward strangers, every disconnection that we've endured from people we love, because those disconnections may actually widen. I was at the state fair yesterday. The fried food was wonderful. The weather was great, but there were so many disheartening moments for me when I saw people wearing things on their chests that I would never repeat to my children. And I thought to myself, they're still going to be here on November 9th. Not in an adversarial way, but I'm still going to have to try and figure out how to navigate my life with people who believe certain ways in my neighborhood, in my family, in my children's schools, in the places where we work and shop and enjoy ourselves. In other words, friends, on November 9th, we'll still be who we are, surrounded by people being who they are in the nation that we've become. And in the resulting storm of that, we're going to need to navigate the turbulence around us and try to bridge the expanses between us. So where will hope be if it all hits the fan on that Tuesday in November? It will be in you, finding whatever it is that will pull you out of the grief and sadness and disbelief that you might want to stay in and back into the fray of the living. It's going to be found in your faith convictions or your personal morality or your internal burdens, in your activism and your advocacy, and in the stuff that you'll still believe in on November 9th. I asked you what causes you're passionate about. That's not going to change. In fact, the fire in you may grow even stronger. Hope is going to be in you deciding what matters most in this life to you, how you're going to pass life, and whether or not it still matters enough to defend it and protect it and speak it, even when threats seem greater than they are right now. Hope is where it is today in the sunrise and how you choose to greet it, because hope will always, always, always be a choice. In that way, Wednesday, November 9th is actually pretty important too. Because on that day, you're still going to be surrounded by hungry people needing to be fed, strangers seeking refuge, outsiders needing welcome, hurting people looking for the healers, and you'll get to be that. No matter what happens, win or lose, you and I need to place our energies and fix our gaze on the ways we can choose gentleness and peace and generosity far from the ballot box. I may have shared this with some of you before, but I received this in 2018. And it's from a 90-year-old woman who was born in the Netherlands, and she lived under Hitler, and her father was tortured in the Dachau prison camps, and he was murdered there. And she wrote to me to tell me she saw history repeating here. And she asked me to keep going, and to keep speaking, and to keep fighting. And this is why November 8th matters, but it's why November 9th matters, and it's why today matters. Because soon we're going to experience one of the pivotal, unprecedented moments in our lifetime. We'll have a chance to allow our voices to be heard and to transform the very planet that we're standing on, as well as the one we leave to the people who will follow us. We'll get to give an inheritance to those we love and a legacy to those that we'll never know. That particular Tuesday, we'll get to let our lives impact the lives of countless human beings with one simple yet profound act. It will be our sacred opportunity to speak precisely from our deepest convictions, to let our hearts clearly resound into the world, and to know that we can be the difference in the day. In the face of the deafening fear out there that would gladly overwhelm us, we'll get the chance to let love have the last, loudest word. And here's the thing. That's beautiful news, but the even better news is that you get to do that today. With small, simple, profound acts of love, you get to let your life impact the lives of other people, and you get to be the difference in the day. Even as you hear these very words, you have that. You have agency, you have power, you have choice. Every single moment we're here, we have a chance to be agents of equity and justice, and we don't have to wait for an event to choose those things, and we can't be fooled into believing that they have an expiration date either. Because the gravity of this moment isn't just about changing congressional seats and flipping districts and political victories, though it's certainly about that. There's so much hanging in the balance on that Tuesday, but the stakes are always high when we live among flawed, failing human beings. The really critical act is remembering that leveraging your life on behalf of others isn't a one-time thing, it is your ever-present calling. It's about you and your daily ability to make this place more compassionate and generous and kind that when you found it. You get to be helper and healer and listener, to be ally and advocate and activist, and there'll be no way you can lose that in November, on the 9th or the 8th or today. As you move toward this day that you might be dreading or worried about, don't miss the countless opportunities that you have with every seemingly unimportant decision to elect hope well before you ever step in a voting booth and long after you walk out. So yes, please vote. But regardless of the results of the election, show up in the world and remember that you always have that choice. Tuesday's important, Wednesday is too. Today is just as critical. Today is the most important day of your life. It always is. What are you thinking about? What's on your mind? What's stirring up in your hearts as we share today?
I'm thinking about my students that were told the Holocaust. I'm thinking about the students that were told about the Holocaust. I'm a retired media coordinator, and I work with my teachers to teach them many things about Anne Frank and the situation. we had Holocaust survivors talk to them. I am worried that some of my students got none of it. They did not understand the danger.
So the fear and the worry about young people, especially not knowing our history, the history of the world, and not understanding the repetition that can happen if we don't know about that. And that's where the burden is on us to be as vocal. And I talk about this all the time. Social media is a gift that most people never had. You know, we didn't have, growing up, you had no mechanism for getting your values out into the world other than in a small circle. And what you have is the ability to perpetuate truth and give history to people as best you can. But the only way that we're going to have a nation of educated voters is by educating them not just in the subjects that they study, but in the deeper things, and how patterns of discrimination affect, and how bigotry happens, and how cults of personality change the trajectory of civilizations. And so it is grief-worthy, and I think about our teachers every day, because they have such a burden to be fighting against forces that are trying to silence them as they do this work. But it's concerning for sure. Yes. We're going to pass the microphone just so the folks who are watching online can hear you. Thank you.
My name is Rick Glatz. I'm actually a visitor from New Hampshire, visiting my daughter who lives in Zebulon.
Welcome.
Thank you. Funny, I mean, I thought of many things from listening to you. It definitely was a call to action. Funnily, I thought of the movie Camelot, and just went through my mind that last scene. You know, even though it was a story about war and stuff, but the last scene where, you know, the whole round table had collapsed and it wasn't succeeding, and the young man came. He still believed, and he said, "You keep it up," you know. And so I really believe that with the youth, you know, and for ourselves too. I mean, Greta Thunberg said that she wants things done today. You know, don't give it up just to the next generation. But yes, that scene from Camelot just came to mind.
Well, I just gave this message to you, and yet there's days when I think, Greece. Okay, Greece sounds nice. And I imagine, or I daydream about what it might be like to live somewhere else, and if I would want to do that. But then the other alternative is, or the other reality is, in times of greatest atrocity in the lifetime of this planet, there have always been decent human beings who stayed and began the process of pushing back, because that expedites how justice happens. So we're going to be more necessary than ever if the worst things happen. So you're right. Yes.
Hey, my name is Laura. I'm visiting. Melanie told me about this, and Greece does sound very nice. What resonated with me, what you said, was that after November 8th, you wake up November 9th, and your passions and the things that you love and the things that are important to you will still be there, regardless of any outcomes.
Yeah.
I think that it is easy to get caught up in the fact that if it doesn't go a certain way, that, you know, all is lost, but it's not. You still wake up in the morning and have the thing, you can make a difference in somebody's life, you can show kindness, and that doesn't cost anything, and it's still going to be the same regardless of which way things go. So that really resonated with me as to, you know, continue to do, you know, the things that are in your heart, and that, you know, one of the children mentioned, you know, just be a good person and show other people that you care.
Yeah. And what we're going to be really dealing with is the idea that there will be an outcome that will either celebrate or will grieve. And there is a truth to that. There's a reality to that if the numbers line up a certain way, we'll be elated or we'll be despondent. And the thing about it is, if it's the latter, the way grief works is, you do grieve and you do mourn the what could have beens and the what you wish were, but then you begin the work, as with all grief, of living in the face of that loss. And you have no other choice. All of us who have lost someone, we move forward even though we do it with a limp, right? And so that's the same way this will work. We will grieve if there are outcomes that are grief worthy, but we will not stop living. And that's why community really matters, because having a place to gather and say, okay, we're going to mourn together, and then we're going to go about the work of doing what good people do. Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate you.
I actually found you on Instagram, and we're visiting Paul's mother here.
Welcome.
I guess one of the things that concerns me is people being able to share differences of opinions with respect. And I feel like we've lost that ability to discuss. I grew up in a family that was split between Democrats and Republicans, and it was always a lively dinner conversation, but people brought facts to the table. We fought passionately. Sometimes we would learn something from someone else's perspective, and it would open our mind to something else, and maybe they would. And I feel like that's what's lost now. And I have a partner who's very conservative, and I try, and it's a good thing, because she said, you know, one of the things I really appreciate about you is that you listen, and I guess, so I think that's a good thing to do. I think that's something we all can do. And I guess the other thing I'm worried about is people speak from, they have their opinions, but their opinions are being formed nowadays super quick, and they're not backed. Like some of the things that I had to talk about, I was talking to someone who had very strong opinions, but based on nothing, based on something that someone had said, but never, they lacked the curiosity to ask the questions like, well, how do you come to that? Regardless of what you think, and we might disagree, but at least in our family, you know, we came with information, or if the argument was weak, we would send the other one back to do the research, and you can come back tomorrow night because it's not holding up.
Right.
And so I worry about that, and I feel like we should be able to be a place that we have different values, different political positions, but we should be able to speak amongst one another with respect.
Yeah, and the problem with all movements, they take on the personality of those who are leading them. And I think so more than anything that what happened in 2016 was the people were given consent to be the worst of themselves, and part of that is to embrace whatever comes across their social media feed as truth, if that feels comforting to them, if that feels like, and so we have lost nuance and complexity. And that's where, though, there is I believe this, that there is a large swath of people in what I would call the humane middle, many of whom vote differently than we do or have different religious opinions, but who will listen, who will engage. It's just right now, those numbers seem to be shrinking. I think we have to do all we can in our circles of influence. You still are close to people. You still have an audience with people who vote differently than you, and that's a value. So the work you're doing relationally, that's this. You know, this is not just about politics or theology. It's the relational fractures, and that's where this is going to be fixed relationally, I think.
Build on that just a little bit. I think the danger also is that it affects, once it's successful on one end, it starts being utilized by the other end. Yeah. And so now everything becomes emotional, and we do lose that subtlety of differences. Yeah. So, you know, I've noticed that the big thing that pushed the Democrats was the abortion issue, the very emotional issue, but it's, you know, but a lot of the other subtle issues are not being discussed. So it's just a very interesting, you know, it becomes worse in a way for everybody. Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's a great point. I've shared this story once before, probably, but I was in North Georgia, in the mountains, rural Georgia, at a Unitarian community, speaking in one of the reddest areas, and all these people were there, and we were doing a talk back, and a woman stood up and she said, "John, here's the thing though, ultimately we have to say right is right and wrong is wrong, and we have to fight for what's right because we have right on our side, and we have to stop this evil from doing what it's doing." And everyone's cheering. And I said to her, "Well, that sounds great, and I agree with you. I think we do have a moral compass that is pure, or at least noble. But I said right now across town there's a bizarro upside-down gathering of this one where people believe very different things, and the speaker is a completely different human being, and they're saying exactly the same thing. We have right on our side, and right is right and wrong is wrong." And what happens is it's easy to create an adversary in someone who believes differently than you. And we are in a battle posture now more than ever. and we're quick to do that. Yes. Any other? Oh, yes, Alex, sorry.
When you were first speaking and talking about the evil and the opposition, which is going to still be there anyway, you got me, and I'm thinking, okay, you convinced me, let's turn on the gas. And then you interjected some hope that we still have the will bright and focus to keep fighting for whatever your beliefs are. Since I've gotten to a situation where I grieve or celebrate by myself, except for my cat and my dog, and I'm remembering when this congregation used to actually all celebrate election night together, we would have a party. So I'm saying that either way, I'm going to want to celebrate or grieve, and I'm inviting you all to recharge my batteries if that's necessary, and I'll do the same for you. So most of you have my number, so give me a call, whichever way it's going.
And I think, okay, one more. And I think that's going to be important. We started off with the medicinal power of community, and I think that's really going to be something we're going to lean into no matter what happens. Hi.
Hi, my name is Emily. I really think that with 2016's election, the country was already really divided and really polarized. I think it was really more of a shock. I worked in Washington, D.C. That's where my family has been from for generations. It was really the unveiling of the polarization that was already present in our society. We just weren't necessarily seeing it and understanding it every day. And it is so interesting now, because I've been in North Carolina for 4 years. I still have a Biden sticker on my car that needs to come off because I'm getting called slurs every 2 weeks. And it's crazy how much that polarization has increased as time has gone on and not decreased. And I am really fearful of what happens if stuff goes too far. What will happen is, will catastrophic stuff happen, or will people start to become more empathetic? I do think one thing we've lost in this polarization is the ability to listen to each other. And it's hard because it seems like so much of the things we're fighting about are human rights. And so it's easy to be like, well, I'm right and they're wrong.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something I struggle with. But also, the spirit of UUism is that your idea of truth can evolve over time, and your opinions can change with new information. And I think that's something that society as a whole could really benefit from. And that's definitely, people are getting really, really stuck in their personal beliefs and not wanting to change on both sides. So I don't know, but I definitely appreciated this.
Well, thank you. And what you touched on was fear, the power of fear. I always tell people, if you do one thing, look for the fears and the false stories in people, because then you'll realize why they believe what they believe or why they support what they support, because there's always a story of fear that is working on us. And the danger is imagining that we don't have that. So people on the far right are being manipulated to be terrified, but we are now terrified of the people on the right. So what we have to do is make sure that our fears are right-sized, right? That we see reality, but we don't turn people into caricatures. And maybe some terrible things will happen, but then compassion will rise up. That's how this works. The pendulum is going to swing back, but we're going to still have our choices in that day about how we respond. So thank you so much.